The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a suffocating perfume of money, power, and Chanel No. 5. It was the annual Metropolitan Vanguard Gala, a night where New York's high society performed its sacred rites under the watchful eyes of ancient statues and impressionist masterpieces. Chandeliers, like constellations of captured stars, dripped crystal light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like tiny, sharpening knives, a delicate percussion accompanying the predatory smiles and whispered negotiations that passed for conversation. This was a jungle draped in silk, and Dr. Leanna Brooks knew its rules better than anyone. At 45, Leanna moved through the gilded crowd with the placid grace of a shark navigating familiar waters. Her gown was a column of midnight blue silk, severe in its elegance, adorned with no jewels save for a pair of simple diamond studs that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. She was an island of minimalist steel and glass in a room of Baroque excess. Her company, Wallace Capital, was a titan in the world of private equity, known for its ruthless efficiency and Leanna's almost preternatural ability to identify a company's single point of failure. Tonight, however, she was not here as a predator. She was here to be anointed. She was to receive the Philanthropist of the Year award, a gilded token meant to soften the edges of her formidable reputation. It was a role she played with the same meticulous control she applied to a corporate restructuring. She smiled. She nodded. She accepted the air kisses that never quite touched her cheek. But beneath the serene mask, she was cataloging every glance, every shift in tone. Every person in this room was either an asset, a liability, or a threat. The host of the evening, and the man who would present her award, was Alistair Vance. He stood near the stage, a vision of old-world charm in a velvet dinner jacket, his silver hair catching the light. He was the chairman of the Vanguard Foundation, a patriarch of inherited wealth whose family had been shaping New York's skyline and its social hierarchy for a century. He and Leanna were rivals, two apex predators circling the same territory. Their battles were waged not in boardrooms, but through proxies, market maneuvers, and the coded language of the elite. Tonight, he was all benevolent smiles. And now, Alistair's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, boomed from the speakers, silencing the room. To present our highest honor, the Philanthropist of the Year award, to a woman whose story is nothing short of miraculous, the incomparable Dr. Leanna Brooks. A polite, yet thunderous, applause filled the hall. A spotlight found Leanna, and she began her walk toward the stage. The journey felt 100 miles long, each step measured under the weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes. Alistair met her at the steps, taking her hand. His grip was firm, proprietary. He leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial murmur into the microphone. "Leanna, my dear, we are all so incredibly proud to witness your improbable rise, to see someone from such humble beginnings achieve all this. It gives hope to everyone, truly." The words hung in the air, perfectly crafted. To the uninitiated, it was a glowing compliment, a testament to the American dream. But to the inner circle, the ones who understood the brutal arithmetic of class and pedigree, it was a devastating public slight. Humble beginnings. He had just reminded everyone, in this room, built on legacies, that she was an outsider. He had reduced her lifetime of Herculean effort, her genius, her Ph.D. in economics, and her multi-billion-dollar empire to a lucky anomaly. He had put her in her place. The warmth in the room chilled by a few imperceptible degrees. Leanna felt the impact like a physical blow, a sudden, cold void in her chest. For a split second, the opulent ballroom dissolved, the chandeliers blurred, and she was no longer a titan of industry in a couture gown. She was 12 years old, standing in the principal's office of a prestigious private school she attended on a full scholarship. Her uniform, meticulously washed and ironed by her mother, was a shade duller than the other girls. Her shoes were from a discount store. She was there because she had won the state science fair, beating the children of senators and CEOs. The principal, a woman with a pearl necklace as tight as her smile, was presenting her with the school's academic medal. But, as she handed it over, she leaned in and whispered, with the same feigned warmth as Alistair, "You must be so proud, Leanna. It's remarkable what a clever girl can do when she tries so very hard to fit in." The words had been a brand, searing into her the shame of being different, of being a project, a charity case whose success was always qualified, always improbable. The memory was a shard of ice in her veins, lasting no more than a heartbeat. But it was enough. The well of deep-seated pain, the one she kept locked and guarded beneath layers of discipline and control, had been struck. She did not flinch. Her expression did not change. But anyone who knew her well would have seen it, a slight tightening of her jaw, a stillness in her eyes that was more terrifying than any outburst. Her hand, held in Alistair's, remained steady. She drew her hand back slowly, deliberately, and stepped to the podium. The heavy, gold-plated award felt like a prop. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces, her gaze sweeping past them until it landed on Alistair, who stood beaming at the side of the stage. She smiled, a small, precise movement of her lips. "Thank you, Alistair," she said, her voice perfectly modulated, betraying nothing. "It's true. I didn't have the benefit of a name that opened doors for me. I had to build my own." The subtext was clear. A clean, devastating cut delivered with a surgeon's skill. A wave of nervous energy rippled through the audience. A few people coughed. The applause that followed was hesitant, uncertain. Leanna had just turned Alistair's weapon back on him. She had acknowledged his slight, refused the shame he tried to pin on her, and reminded him that his power was inherited, while hers was earned. As she walked off the stage, the award in her hand, she knew this was not the end of it. Alistair Vance did not forgive such public rebukes. This was a declaration of war. And as she returned to her table, her mind was already shifting from philanthropy to strategy. The pain of the 12-year-old girl in the principal's office was being forged into the cold, hard resolve of the woman she had become. The humiliation was not a wound. It was fuel. 2 days later, Leanna was in her office, a sanctuary of minimalist steel and glass, perched 60 floors above the chaos of Manhattan. The space was a reflection of her mind, ordered, precise, and devoid of sentiment. A single, perfect orchid sat on her vast obsidian desk. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a concrete kingdom she had conquered. But today, she wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at Priya Sharma, her chief of staff. Priya, at 29, was preternaturally composed, a brilliant strategist in her own right, whom Leanna had personally mentored. She was the only person who had seen the flicker of pain in Leanna's eyes at the gala. "He did it on purpose," Priya said, her voice low. She held a tablet displaying a dozen articles about the gala. All of them praised Alistair's touching tribute to Leanna's journey. The press had swallowed the poison as if it were honey. "Of course he did," Leanna replied, her gaze fixed on the middle distance. "Power isn't just about having money, Priya. It's about controlling the narrative." Alistair just reminded the world that, in his story, I'm still the scholarship kid. He's the gatekeeper, and I'm the one he graciously let in. "So what do we do?" Priya asked. A public rebuttal. A strategically leaked story about one of his less-than-charitable business dealings? Liana shook her head. "No, reacting is a sign of weakness. It proves his words have power over me. We do nothing. We wait. A man like Alistair can't stand being upstaged. He'll make another move, a less subtle one. And when he does, we'll be ready." Her phone buzzed. It was a notification for her flight to Chicago that afternoon. A $2 billion acquisition deal for a promising aerospace tech firm was in its final stages. The deal was critical for Aurora Air, one of the nation's largest carriers, whose board Alistair Vance conveniently advised. It was a project Liana had personally structured. "Time to go," she said, rising from her desk. The gala was behind her. Business was business. Priya stood as well. "Are you sure you want to fly Aurora after the gala? Giving them your business feels—" "It feels like power." Liana finished for her. "They need my capital. Alistair knows it. Flying on his pet airline is a message his petty insults are irrelevant to me. The real game is played with billions, not words." She picked up her sleek leather bag. Inside was her phone, which held the digital keys to the $2 billion transfer. She was calm, focused, the iron control firmly back in place. But as she walked toward the door, the ghost of Alistair's whisper, "Humble beginnings," echoed in her mind. It was a debt. She decided. That would be paid in full. The first-class lounge at JFK was an oasis of muted tones and hushed efficiency. Liana sat alone, reviewing the final details of the Aurora Air deal on her tablet. The acquisition was a lifeline for the airline, a strategic pivot into next-generation logistics and avionics that would secure its future for decades. And it was all financed by Wallace Capital. The boarding announcement for Flight 2227 to Chicago echoed softly. Liana gathered her things and made her way to Gate A14. The familiar hierarchy of air travel was on full display, a river of economy passengers to the right, a smaller stream for business class, and a pristine red carpet leading directly to the gate for the chosen few in first class. Liana walked with a steady, unhurried stride. Her charcoal-tailored suit was a uniform of quiet authority. She needed no entourage. Power, she believed, was most potent when it moved alone. At the head of the red carpet stood a gate agent, Megan Sutter. Her uniform was crisp, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. A faint, practiced smile was fixed on her face as she scanned the ticket of the man in front of Liana, a florid executive in a navy suit. The scanner beeped its green approval, and he passed. When Liana stepped forward, the smile vanished from Megan's face as if switched off. Her eyes swept over Liana, a flicker of something disdain, suspicion in their depths. "Economy is to the right," Megan said. Her voice was sharp, loud enough to make several people in the adjacent lines turn their heads. The air thickened. Liana felt a familiar, weary tightening in her chest. This was a battle she had fought 1,000 times in 1,000 different forms. She held out her boarding pass, the bold Seat 2A clearly visible. "First class," Liana stated, her voice low and firm, betraying no emotion. Megan folded her arms, refusing to even look at the ticket. "This line is reserved for first class and elite members only. Please step aside so you don't hold up the boarding process." The public nature of the confrontation, the deliberate humiliation, was a signature. It felt practiced. Liana didn't move. She offered the ticket again, her hand perfectly steady. "Scan it." The murmurings in the crowd grew. A teenager, pretending to scroll through his phone, angled the camera to record. With an exasperated sigh, Megan snatched the ticket from Leanna's hand as if it were contaminated. She dragged it across the scanner. A loud, clear beep echoed, and the screen flashed a brilliant green. Valid. Seat 2A. The crowd held its breath, expecting an apology, a grudging wave through. Instead, Megan's fingers tapped furiously on her keyboard. A few seconds passed. Then, with a look of smug triumph, she pushed the ticket back toward Leanna with two stiff fingers. "That seat has just been reassigned to another priority passenger due to an equipment change," she announced, her voice ringing with false authority. "The system shows you've been reaccommodated in economy. A compensation voucher will be issued." The lie was so bald, so audacious. It was almost artistic. There had been no announcement of an equipment change. The man in seat 1A had just boarded. It was a fabrication, a crude exercise of petty power. Two airport security officers, drawn by the tension, began to approach. "Is there a problem here?" one asked, his hand resting near his sidearm. "This woman is obstructing boarding," Megan said quickly, pointing at Leanna. This was the moment she was expected to make a scene, to raise her voice, to prove their caricature of her right, or to retreat in shame, to accept the lie and scurry over to the economy line. Leanna did neither. She calmly set her suitcase on the floor. She looked at Megan, at the approaching guards, at the sea of phones now openly recording her. This wasn't a random act of prejudice. The gala, the coded insult, and now this, a public humiliation on Alistair's airline. On the very day she was finalizing their multi-billion-dollar salvation. The precision was too perfect. This was not a coincidence. This was a move. Alistair was testing her, trying to provoke her into an emotional, uncalculated reaction. He was about to be disappointed. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved with swift, economical grace across the screen. She opened a secure messaging app connected directly to her firm's senior trading desk. She typed 2 words. "Freeze Aurora." She hit send. A silent touch, an invisible command. But hundreds of miles away, in the glass tower of Wallace Capital, it detonated like a nuclear bomb. The $2 billion wire transfer, the lifeblood Aurora Air was desperately awaiting, was instantly halted. The legal frameworks underpinning the acquisition were frozen solid. Covenants in a half-dozen other related contracts were likely triggered, setting off a chain reaction of financial crises. Leanna slipped her phone back into her bag, as if she'd just replied to a casual text. To the crowd, she was still just a woman being unjustly barred from a flight. To Megan, she was a problem to be disposed of. But, in the silent, digital world where real power resided, she had just brought an entire airline to its knees. She had taken Alistair's carefully orchestrated public humiliation and raised him a $2 billion catastrophe. She looked at Megan, a chillingly calm expression on her face. The game had just changed, and Dr. Leanna Brooks was ready to play. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. On the 48th floor of Aurora Air's headquarters, the Treasury floor convulsed. Screens that had been glowing a healthy green, tracking the inbound transfer from Wallace Capital, suddenly bled crimson. The numbers vanished, replaced by a single, brutal word, rescinded. "What the hell just happened?" roared Victor Lang, Aurora's CEO, a man whose tenure was defined by bluster and a belief in his own infallibility. Helena Voss, the sharp-minded CFO, stared at her monitor, her face ashen. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Wallace Capital just pulled the plug. The entire deal is frozen." "That's impossible," Victor bellowed, his face purpling. "We have a signed agreement. Get their legal on the phone now." But before anyone could move, the true nature of the crisis began to reveal itself, not through corporate channels, but through the court of public opinion. A junior analyst in the communications department, scrolling frantically through Twitter, let out a strangled gasp. "Sir, you need to see this." He turned his monitor around. On the screen was a shaky, 40-second video from JFK's Gate A14. It showed a poised, impeccably dressed black woman being condescendingly directed to the economy line. It showed the green flash of her valid first-class ticket. It showed a gate agent fabricating a story about her seat being reassigned. The caption read, "Aurora Air doesn't think this woman belongs in first class. Is this your company policy? Aurora Air, Dacia flying while black." The video was exploding. In the 10 minutes since it had been posted, it had amassed over 100,000 views. The comment section was a torrent of fury. Victor Lang stared at the woman's face on the screen. It was calm, controlled, but her eyes held a glint of something he recognized from his own board meetings. Absolute, unyielding power. "Who is that?" he demanded. Helena Voss didn't look up from her own screen, where she was cross-referencing Wallace Capital's executive profiles. Her voice was barely a whisper. "That, Victor, is Dr. Leanna Brooks." The name hung in the boardroom like a death sentence. The woman their gate agent had just publicly humiliated was not just a passenger. She was the architect of their salvation, the sole signatory with the power to move $2 billion. The corporate servers began to groan under the weight of incoming emails. Phones on every desk lit up with calls from journalists, shareholders, and panicked board members. On the trading floor, pre-market indicators for Aurora's stock began to plummet. Leanna, meanwhile, had not moved from her spot at the gate. She stood in a bubble of profound silence, the chaos of the crowd swirling around her. She was aware of the cameras, the whispers, the escalating tension, but her focus was elsewhere. She was calculating. The airport incident was the public catalyst. The social media outrage was the accelerant. Alistair had planned it beautifully. He wanted to destabilize Aurora, make them look incompetent and toxic, tank their stock. And then, what a hostile takeover drive them into the ground for his own amusement. The motive was still unclear, but the method was becoming terrifyingly apparent. Priya, who had been watching from the business class line, received a one-word text from Leanna Investigate. A second text followed Alistair Vance. Priya's eyes widened. She understood immediately. This wasn't about a gate agent. This was the next move in the war that had been declared at the gala. She discreetly slipped away from the line and made a call. "Marcus, I need you. Full digital forensics. I want every communication, every financial transaction, every digital footprint related to Alistair Vance and Aurora Air for the past 6 months. And I need it yesterday." Marcus Thorne was not a lawyer or a banker. He was a digital ghost, a former investigative journalist turned high-priced corporate sleuth who specialized in uncovering the secrets the powerful tried to bury. If Alistair had left so much as a single stray electron behind, Marcus would find it. Back at Gate A14, a supervisor, Omar Patel, finally pushed his way through the crowd, his face pale and beaded with sweat. His radio had been crackling with frantic, high-level commands. He had been ordered by the president of operations to fix this now. "Ma'am, I am so sorry," he began, his voice shaking. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Leanna simply looked at him, her silence more damning than any accusation. "Please," Omar pleaded, gesturing toward the jet bridge. "Allow us to escort you to your seat." "My seat," Leanna said, her voice quiet but carrying across the hushed gate area, was apparently given away. Before Omar could respond, Liana's phone buzzed. It was an alert from a news aggregator. A headline from a major financial news network flashed across her screen: Wallace Capital halts, 2B, Aurora Air Deal. Sources cite crisis of confidence in management. The news was out. The two events, the humiliation at the gate and the collapse of the deal, were now inextricably linked in the public mind. The story was no longer just about prejudice. It was about incompetence. It was about a company so fundamentally broken that it would sabotage its own multi-billion-dollar future over a first-class seat. Alistair had wanted a public spectacle. Liana had just given him one. But with a script he never could have anticipated. She had refused to be the victim in his play. Instead, she had seized control of the entire production. A crisis of confidence, Liana murmured to herself, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time. Yes, that's exactly what this is. She looked up, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, the supervisor, and the now trembling Megan Sutter. She wasn't just fighting for a seat anymore. She was fighting for control of a narrative that was about to rock an entire industry. And she knew, with cold certainty, that this was only the beginning. The battle for the narrative began in earnest, within the hour. Aurora Air shame was the #1 trending topic worldwide. The initial 40-second video was a viral supernova, spawning thousands of reaction videos, memes, and impassioned commentaries. Liana Brooks's name was on everyone's lips, not as a victim of discrimination, but as a symbol of quiet, surgical power. One viral tweet captured the sentiment perfectly. They tried to put her in the back of the plane. She responded by putting their entire company in the ground. Queen. In Aurora's crisis room, a hastily convened gathering of panicked executives in what was usually a cheerful cafeteria, Victor Lang was unraveling. He slammed his fist on a table, rattling a tray of untouched pastries. "I want a statement out now," he roared. "We apologize unreservedly. The employee has been suspended pending investigation. We are a company that values diversity and inclusion. Blah, blah, blah. Get it done." Marcus Dell, the chief legal counsel, a man whose perpetual expression was one of pained resignation, shook his head. "Victor, a press release is like throwing a paper towel at a tidal wave. Dr. Brooks hasn't said a word publicly. She's letting the world speak for her. And she hasn't just frozen the deal. She's created a material breach event. We have no leverage." The door to the crisis room burst open. A frazzled communications intern rushed in. "Mr. Lang, Alistair Vance is on line 1. He says it's urgent." A flicker of hope ignited in Victor's eyes. "Alistair, thank God. He's on our side. He'll help us manage this." Victor snatched the phone. "Alistair, it's a nightmare. A complete misunderstanding blown out of proportion." Alistair's voice on the other end was a smooth balm of concern. "Victor, my friend, I saw the news. It's horrifying. A terrible look for the company. I've already been fielding calls from other board members. They're concerned, deeply concerned." "What should I do, Alistair? She won't take my calls." "Listen to me carefully, Victor," Alistair said, his tone shifting from sympathy to command. "You need to contain this. The market is reacting violently. Your leadership is being called into question. You need to show decisive action. But more importantly, this incident reveals a deep, systemic rot within Aurora. Perhaps this is a blessing in disguise, an opportunity to restructure from the top down." The implication was chillingly clear. Alistair wasn't offering help. He was circling, smelling blood in the water. Victor felt a cold dread creep up his spine. "What are you saying?" Alistair, I'm saying that I and a few other key stakeholders believe it's time for a change in leadership. Someone who can restore investor confidence. Someone who can clean house. The line went dead. Victor stared at the receiver in his hand. The truth crashing down on him. This wasn't a crisis Alistair was helping him solve. This was a coup. And the incident at Gate A14 was the manufactured pretext. Meanwhile, in a sterile, white office in Soho, Marcus Thorne was conducting a digital autopsy. Lines of code scrolled across his multiple monitors. He was a maestro, conducting an orchestra of data. "He's good," Marcus murmured to Priya, who stood watching over his shoulder. "Vance uses encrypted channels, proxies, burner devices. His digital hygiene is impeccable, but everyone gets sloppy." Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I can't find a direct link between Vance and the gate agent. He's too smart for that. But money leaves a trail. Always." He pulled up a complex web of financial transactions, shell corporations, and anonymous crypto wallets. "Let's look at Megan Sutter's life. Any unusual windfalls lately?" He dug into her financials, student loans, a car payment, a modest credit card debt. Nothing unusual. Then he found it. 3 weeks ago, a third-party LLC he had never heard of had paid off her mother's entire mortgage. A single payment of $87. "Bingo," Marcus said. He began tracing the LLC. It was a labyrinth. The company was registered in Delaware, owned by another in the Cayman Islands, which was in turn funded by a trust in Liechtenstein. It was a professional-grade money laundering setup. "This is going to take time," Marcus said. "But the architect of this maze has a style. I've seen it before." While Marcus hunted in the digital world, Leanna made her first public move. She hadn't left the airport. Instead, she had agreed to a single, on-camera interview with a respected national news anchor who had rushed to the scene. They sat in a quiet corner of the terminal. The chaos of Gate A14, a visible backdrop. The anchor began with the obvious question. "Dr. Brooks, how did it feel to be treated that way?" Leanna met the camera's gaze, her own calm and direct. "This wasn't about my feelings. It was about a corporate culture that empowers an employee to believe they can invalidate a person's value on site. And, if that culture exists at the gate, it exists in the boardroom. It exists in their safety protocols. It exists in their financial management. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a deeper disease." She had masterfully reframed the entire event. This was no longer about race or class. It was about corporate competence. It was a message aimed directly at Wall Street, at the institutional investors and pension funds that held Aurora's fate in their hands. "And the $2 billion deal," the anchor pressed. "Wallace Capital cannot, in good faith, invest in a company that has demonstrated such a catastrophic failure of judgment at every level," Leanna said, her words precise and devastating. "Our responsibility is to our shareholders, and right now, Aurora Air is an unacceptably high-risk investment." The interview was a masterclass in corporate warfare. She had expressed no personal anger, made no accusations of prejudice. She had simply laid out a cold, logical, and irrefutable business case for her actions. As the interview aired live, the bottom fell out of Aurora's stock. It was no longer a slide. It was a free fall. And in his Park Avenue office, Alistair Vance watched, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. Everything was going according to plan. Leanna had reacted exactly as he'd predicted with cold, calculated logic. She was playing chess, and he was ready for her every move. He thought he knew her, thought he understood the source of her discipline. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The pain he had tapped into at the gala was deeper and more powerful than he could ever imagine. Leanna returned to her office, the adrenaline of the past few hours giving way to a cold, focused resolve. The sun was setting, painting the city in hues of orange and violet. But she didn't notice. Her world had narrowed to the glowing screens in front of her. Priya and Marcus were waiting for her, their faces grim. "The money trail for the mortgage payment is a dead end for now," Marcus said, foregoing any pleasantries. "It's designed to be untraceable, but the design itself is a signature. The specific layering of shell core, the choice of jurisdictions. I've seen it twice before. Once in the takedown of a Russian oligarch, and once in the hostile takeover of a German pharmaceutical giant. Both operations were masterminded by the same boutique firm, a corporate intelligence outfit called Argent Strategy." Leanna's eyes sharpened. "I've heard of them. They're ghosts. Deniable assets for the ultra-rich." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "And guess who has had Argent Strategy on a quiet, multi-million-dollar retainer for the past 5 years? Alistair Vance," Leanna said. It wasn't a question. "This is it," Priya said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. "This is the proof. The gala, the gate agent, the media storm. It's all connected. It's an Argent operation, funded by Vance." They had found the who, but the why remained a gaping hole in the center of their theory. Why would Alistair go to such lengths? A corporate rivalry didn't explain the sheer viciousness, the personal nature of the attacks. It felt like a vendetta. "He wants to dismantle Aurora and pick up the pieces for pennies on the dollar," Priya theorized. "It's a classic vulture capital play." Leanna shook her head. "No, it's more than that. This isn't about money. Not for Alistair. This is about me." She thought back to the gala, to the venom hidden behind his smile. This was personal, but she couldn't see the connection. Their paths had crossed in business for years, always as competitors. But there was no single event, no singular wound that could explain this level of hatred. "Keep digging. Marcus," Leanna commanded. "I want to know everything about Argent. I want to know every operation they've ever run. And I want you to find the source of Alistair's obsession with me. There's a piece of this puzzle we're missing." As Marcus returned to his digital hunt, Alistair made his next, much-anticipated move. A press release hit the wires, announced on every major financial network. A consortium of investors, led by Alistair Vance, was launching an emergency tender offer, a hostile takeover bid for Aurora Air. The release was a work of art, dripping with righteous concern. It spoke of the urgent need for new leadership, the failure to protect shareholder value, and the deeply disturbing cultural issues brought to light by the recent incident. Alistair was positioning himself not as a corporate raider, but as a white knight, riding in to save the company from itself. He was using the very crisis he had engineered as the justification for his takeover. "He's brilliant," Priya breathed, reading the statement. "He's using your own words against the company. He's turning the public outrage into his primary weapon." The attack was now two-pronged. On one front, Alistair was consolidating financial power, rallying shareholders, and preparing to seize control of the company. On the other, he began a subtle but brutal character assassination campaign against Leanna. Anonymous stories began to leak to gossip columns and financial blogs. They painted Leanna as a vindictive, emotionally unstable operator. One story claimed she had frozen the $2 billion deal out of personal pique. Another whispered that Wallace Capital was over-leveraged, that Leanna's empire was a house of cards. They were lies, but they were corrosive, designed to sow doubt among her own partners and investors. The pressure mounted. Leanna's phone rang incessantly with calls from her own board members. They were nervous. "Leanna, this is getting out of hand," said David Chen, one of her oldest partners. "The Aurora deal is dead, and now Vance is using it to drag your name through the mud. Maybe we should just walk away. Let him have the damned airline." "No," Leanna said, her voice like ice. "Walking away is what he wants. This isn't about Aurora anymore. David, he's coming after us. He's trying to discredit me to weaken Wallace Capital. If we show any sign of weakness, he'll pounce." But the attacks were taking their toll. She felt the walls closing in. Alistair was a master of this game, fighting on multiple fronts, using the media, the market, and her own reputation as weapons. For the first time, Leanna felt a flicker of doubt. She was fighting a ghost, a man whose motives were shrouded in mystery, whose resources seemed limitless. Her breaking point came late one night. She was alone in her office, staring out at the city lights, when Priya brought her a tablet. "You need to see this," Priya said softly. On the screen was an article from a notoriously sleazy tabloid. The headline was vicious: "The tragic past of the Queen of Capital. Did Leanna Brooks build her empire on ashes?" The article was a twisted retelling of the darkest moment of her life. 20 years ago, when she was just starting out, she and a partner had a small tech startup. A fire had broken out in their small office one night. A tragic accident. An electrical fault. The fire marshal had said. But the article spun a different tale. It hinted at negligence, at cut corners on safety, at Leanna's ruthless ambition being the cause of the tragedy. But that wasn't the part that made the blood drain from her face. It was the name of the person who had died in that fire. A young intern working late that night. A brilliant young woman named Clara. Clara Vance, Alistair Vance's younger sister. The room tilted. The air grew thin. The missing piece of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. This was never about business. This was never about a corporate rivalry. It was about revenge. Alistair didn't just blame her for his sister's death. He held her responsible for the ashes of his entire family. And he had been planning, for 20 years, to make her pay. Leanna sank into her chair, the fortress of her composure finally cracking. The polished steel and glass of her office felt like a cage. The city lights outside seemed to mock her. She had been playing chess, but Alistair had been playing a different game entirely. A long, patient game of vengeance. And she had just walked into his checkmate. The memory of the fire, a horror she had buried deep within her soul, came rushing back. The smell of smoke, the wail of sirens, the crushing weight of a loss that was not her fault, but for which she felt an unbearable responsibility. For 2 decades, she had carried that grief in silence. Now, Alistair had dragged it out into the light, twisting it into a weapon to destroy her. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a cold, dark despair she hadn't felt since she was that 12-year-old girl in the principal's office. All her success, all her power, all her wealth, it meant nothing in the face of this raw, personal hatred. Alistair had found her single point of failure: her past. She picked up her phone and made a call she hadn't made in years. "Elias, it's Leanna," she said, her voice small, almost broken. "I need your help." Dr. Elias Vance, no relation to Alistair, was her former economics professor and mentor. A gentle, brilliant man, now retired and living a quiet life in upstate New York. He was the one who had first seen the fire in her mind, who had pushed her to apply for the scholarships, who had told her that her mind was a gift that could change the world. He was the moral compass she had long since stopped consulting. "Leanna," he said, his voice warm and kind, instantly transporting her back to his dusty, book-filled office. "I was wondering when you would call. I've been reading the news. It seems you're in a storm." "I'm not in a storm, Elias," she whispered, tears finally blurring the city lights into a smear of cold fire. "I am the storm. Or at least, he thinks I am." She told him everything. About Alistair, about the gala, the airport, about the fire, about Clara. When she finished, the silence on the line was heavy. "He's using his grief as a sword," Elias said finally. "But grief that is not processed, Liana, curdles into poison. He is not attacking you for what you did. He is attacking you for who you have become. Your success is a constant reminder of what he believes his sister lost." "But it was an accident. Elias," she pleaded, the words catching in her throat. The fire marshal's report was clear. "The truth doesn't matter to a man in search of a villain," Elias said softly. "But it must matter to you. You built this fortress around yourself, Liana, this armor of control, and it has served you well. But armor is heavy. It can protect you, but it can also prevent you from healing. This isn't just about beating Alistair in a boardroom. It's about facing the ghost that has haunted you both for 20 years. He paused. "What does your heart tell you to do?" Liana closed her eyes. For years, her heart had been silent, overridden by the cold logic of her mind. But now, she listened, and what she heard was not a desire for revenge, not a thirst for destruction. It was a profound, aching need for the truth. "I need to know what really happened that night," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its old strength. "I need to know why." "Then that is your path," Elias said. "Don't fight his war. Liana, fight yours. Don't fight for revenge. Fight for truth. True power isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about rebuilding on a foundation of truth." Hanging up the phone, Liana felt a shift inside her. The despair was still there, but it was now mingled with something else: clarity. Elias was right. She had been playing Alistair's game, reacting to his moves. It was time to change the board. She called Marcus. "Forget Argent's strategy for a moment," she said, her voice now cold and clear as a winter morning. "I want you to pull every document related to a fire at a startup called Innovatech 20 years ago. Police reports, fire marshal's investigation, insurance claims, everything. And I want you to run a full background check on the fire marshal who signed off on the report. I want to know who he had lunch with, who was in his bank account. Everything. We're not looking for a corporate conspiracy anymore. Marcus, we're looking for a murder." The hunt was on, not for leverage, but for justice. The dark night of her soul was over. The dawn was breaking, and with it came the promise of a final, terrible reckoning. Armed with a new sense of purpose, Liana moved with terrifying speed, while Marcus and his team of digital archaeologists excavated the 20-year-old fire investigation. She and Priya went on the offensive. Alistair's emergency shareholder meeting for Aurora Air was in 48 hours. The takeover vote was all but a foregone conclusion. Alistair had swayed the board, terrified the institutional investors, and won the court of public opinion. He believed Liana was cornered, broken by the public exhumation of her past. He was expecting her to retreat, to issue denials, to fight a defensive war. Instead, Liana went silent. She disappeared from the public eye. She issued no statements. Wallace Capital released a single, terse announcement: "Dr. Brooks is preparing her response and will deliver it at the appropriate forum." The silence was unnerving. It created a vacuum, and into that vacuum, Speculation rushed. Was she preparing a lawsuit? Was she liquidating her Aurora holdings? Was she surrendering? Alistair grew confident, even arrogant. He saw her silence as a white flag. But Liana wasn't surrendering. She was gathering her thunder. 36 hours before the meeting, Marcus called. His voice was electric. I found it. Liana. I found the ghost. He had uncovered it, not in a financial record, but in a series of faded, forgotten expense reports from the original fire investigation. The lead fire marshal, a man named Frank Dorsey, had a gambling problem. In the weeks following his ruling that the Innovatec fire was an accident, a series of anonymous cash deposits, totaling over $200,000, appeared in his wife's bank account. Dorsey had retired to Florida, a rich man a year later. The money came from the same Liechtenstein trust that funded the payoff for Megan Sutter's mother. Marcus explained. It's Alistair's personal slush fund, laundered through Argent Strategy. He didn't just twist the narrative of the fire. Liana, he bought it. But that wasn't the bombshell. The fire wasn't an accident, Marcus said, his voice dropping. It was arson. The initial report from the first responders on the scene noted traces of a chemical accelerant near the main server room. That finding was erased from the final report Dorsey filed. It was a professional job, designed to look like an electrical fire. Liana felt a chill go through her. For 20 years, she had believed it was a tragic accident. The idea that someone had deliberately set that fire, that Clara's death was murder, it was unthinkable. But why, she asked, who would do it? Innovatec was on the verge of a major breakthrough, Marcus said, pulling up old project files. You had developed a proprietary data compression algorithm that was years ahead of its time. It would have been revolutionary, and you were in final talks to license it to a major tech conglomerate. But there was a rival bidder, a much larger, more aggressive competitor who had been trying to acquire your algorithm for months. A company called Omnicorp. Omnicorp, a corporate predator known for its scorched earth tactics. They had been furious when Liana and her partner had refused their lowball offer. Omnicorp sabotaged us, Liana breathed. They burned us to the ground to steal our research. Worse, Marcus said. Guess who was Omnicorp's lead negotiator on that deal? The man who swore he'd ruin you after you turned him down. Liana knew the answer before he said it. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that explained everything, clicked into place. Alistair Vance, Marcus confirmed. Liana's mind reeled. The timeline was horrifyingly clear. Alistair, working for Omnicorp, had tried to buy their startup when she refused. He had ordered the arson to destroy their work and eliminate them as a competitor. But his own sister, Clara, whom he had likely convinced to intern there to keep an eye on things, had been caught in the fire. His sabotage had backfired in the most tragic way possible. His vendetta against her wasn't born of grief for his sister's accidental death. It was born of a monstrous, unbearable guilt. He couldn't face the fact that he was responsible for his own sister's murder. So, he had invented a villain. He had paid off the fire marshal to rule it an accident, and had spent the next 20 years cultivating a narrative where Liana's ambition, not his own criminality, was the cause of the tragedy. His entire crusade, his meticulous, long-planned revenge, was a lie constructed to hide a truth he could not live with. The sheer, Shakespearean weight of it was staggering. Liana felt a wave of nausea, but also a profound, icy clarity. She finally understood the man she was fighting. He wasn't a grieving brother. He was a murderer, haunted by his crime. Priya, Liana said, her voice steady and hard as diamond. Cancel my flight to Chicago. I'll be attending a different meeting. The morning of the Aurora Air Emergency Shareholder Meeting was gray and drizzly. The sky over Manhattan, the color of wet cement. The meeting was being held in a vast, sterile auditorium, a place usually reserved for product launches and corporate pageantry. Today, it was a gladiatorial arena. The world's financial press was crammed into the back, their cameras like a firing squad. The shareholders, a sea of grim-faced men and women in dark suits, sat in nervous silence. The meeting was being live-streamed globally. On the stage, Alistair Vance sat at the center of a long table, the picture of sober, responsible leadership. He had spent the morning delivering a brilliant, impassioned speech about restoring honor, integrity, and profitability to the beleaguered airline. He had the votes. The takeover was a certainty. Victor Lang, the deposed CEO, sat in the front row, a ghost at his own funeral. "And so," Alistair said, his voice resonating with gravitas as he concluded his remarks, "it is with a heavy heart, but a firm resolve, that we must move forward. We must turn the page on this dark chapter. The vote to approve the new leadership structure is now open." The chairman of the board began the formal proceedings. It was a formality. Everyone knew the outcome. And then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. A collective gasp went through the room. Heads turned. Cameras swiveled. Dr. Leanna Brooks walked into the room. She was alone. She wore a simple, sleeveless black dress. Her only adornment, the same quiet diamond studs. She looked not like a defeated executive, but like a figure of mythic justice. She walked down the central aisle with a slow, deliberate pace, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the stunned silence. She didn't stop at the audience seats. She walked directly to the stage, climbed the short set of stairs, and took an empty seat at the main table, directly opposite Alistair. Alistair's face, for the first time, lost its perfect composure. A flicker of shock, then rage, crossed his features before he masked it with a condescending smile. "Dr. Brooks," he said into his microphone, his voice dripping with false magnanimity, "this is a private shareholder meeting. While we appreciate your interest, your presence here is not required." "Oh, I think it is. Alistair," Leanna said. Her voice was quiet, but every microphone picked it up, broadcasting it to the world. She placed a thin portfolio on the table in front of her. "Before this body votes to hand you the keys to a multi-billion-dollar company, I believe they have the right to know exactly who they are getting into business with." The chairman sputtered, "This is highly irregular." "The truth often is," Leanna said. Her eyes locked on Alistair. "You've all heard Mr. Vance's version of events, a story of his crusade to save this company from a culture of incompetence. A culture, he claims, that I exposed." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "But that is a lie." She, systematically, calmly, began to dismantle him. She detailed the Argent strategy retainer. She explained the untraceable payment that had settled Megan Sutter's mother's mortgage. She laid out, piece by piece, the evidence that the incident at Gate A14 was not a random act of prejudice, but a meticulously engineered event, an act of corporate sabotage designed by Alistair himself to crash Aurora's stock and create the pretext for this very takeover. A wave of shock rolled through the auditorium. Shareholders murmured, glancing at each other, then at Alistair, whose face was now a rigid, pale mask. "These are baseless accusations," Alistair boomed, slamming his hand on the table. "A desperate fantasy from a woman on the verge of losing everything." "Am I?" Leanna asked softly. "You see, your mistake, Alistair, was making this personal. You didn't just attack my company. You attacked my history." Her voice dropped, becoming heavy with a sorrow that felt ancient. "You brought up the fire. The fire at Innovatech 20 years ago. You tried to use the tragic death of your sister, Clara, as a weapon against me." Alistair rose from his chair, his face contorted with a grief that seemed, for a moment, utterly genuine. "You have no right to speak her name. You built your empire on the ashes of my family, your ambition, your negligence. It killed her." He screamed, his voice cracking, the polished veneer finally shattering to reveal the raw wound beneath. The room was in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. The chairman was banging his gavel, calling for order. Leanna remained seated, an island of stillness in the hurricane. She waited for the noise to die down. When it did, her voice cut through the tension like a shard of glass. "No, Alistair," she said, her voice filled with a terrible, quiet pity. "My ambition didn't kill her." She opened the portfolio. "Your ambition did." She projected a document onto the massive screen behind the stage. It was the original, suppressed report from the first responders. The words, "chemical accelerant detected," were highlighted in red. "The fire was arson. Alistair." Then she projected a second document, a summary of bank records showing a $200,000 payment from his Liechtenstein trust to the fire marshal. "An arson you paid to have covered up?" Alistair stared at the screen, his breathing ragged, his eyes wide with horror. He looked like a man watching his own ghost rise from the grave. Leanna delivered the final, fatal blow. "You weren't grieving for your sister, Alistair. You were hiding. You were Omnicorp's lead negotiator. You set the fire to destroy my research after I refused your offer. But something went wrong. Didn't it? Your own sister, who you had planted in my company, was working late that night. Your crime killed the one person you claimed to be avenging." She stood up, her voice ringing with the clarity of absolute truth. "Your entire life, your vendetta against me, has been a monstrous lie to hide your own guilt. You didn't lose your family in that fire, Alistair. You destroyed it." Alistair Vance made a sound, a choked, inhuman cry of despair and rage. He lunged across the table toward her, his face a mask of primal fury. Security guards swarmed the stage, tackling him, dragging him away as he screamed her name, the sound devolving into incoherent sobs. The cameras flashed, a strobe-lit ballet of utter and complete ruin. In front of the entire world, Alistair Vance, the patrician, the power broker, the white knight, had been exposed for what he truly was: a guilty, broken man. Leanna Brooks stood alone on the stage, the victor. But she felt no triumph, only a vast, empty silence where 20 years of pain and suspicion used to be. The battle was over. Now, the work of rebuilding could begin. In the aftermath of Alistair Vance's public immolation, the world realigned itself. He was ruined, not just financially, but existentially. He faced federal charges for corporate sabotage, conspiracy, and, pending the reopening of a 20-year-old cold case, murder. The Vance name, once a symbol of New York aristocracy, became a synonym for disgrace. Aurora Air, its stock in tatters and its leadership decapitated, was on the brink of collapse. In the ensuing power vacuum, the board, desperate for a savior, turned to the only person who had the capital, the credibility, and the strategic genius to save them. They offered the position of chairwoman to Dr. Leanna Brooks. She accepted. Her first act was not one of vengeance. There were no mass firings, no purges. Instead, She called an all-hands meeting, broadcast to every Aurora employee worldwide, from the pilots and mechanics to the gate agents and baggage handlers. She didn't speak from a podium. She stood on the hangar floor, surrounded by the giant, silent aircraft. This company has been poisoned by a culture of fear and blame. She told them, "That ends today. We will rebuild Aurora Air on a new foundation, not just of profit, but of principle, of respect, not because it makes for a good press release, but because it is the only way to build a company that lasts." She could have crushed Alistair's remaining assets, scattered them to the wind. But Elias's words echoed in her mind. True power isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about rebuilding. She met with the federal prosecutors, in a move that stunned the financial world. She structured a settlement. The bulk of Alistair's forfeited personal assets, hundreds of millions of dollars, would not be absorbed by Wallace Capital or Aurora Air. Instead, they would be used to seed a new, independent charitable organization. She announced it at a quiet press conference a month later. It was called the Vance Brooks Foundation. "This foundation," she explained, her voice steady, "will have two missions. First, it will provide crisis support and counseling for all those affected by corporate crime and negligence. Second, it will provide seed funding and mentorship for brilliant entrepreneurs from overlooked communities, those who have faced systemic prejudice and have been told, in one way or another, that they do not belong." It was a breathtaking act of grace. She had taken the poisoned legacy of Alistair Vance, the man who had tried to destroy her, and transformed it into a source of healing and opportunity. She had broken the cycle of revenge, refusing to let his darkness define her victory. The final scene of her long war was not in a boardroom, not on a stage, and not in front of a camera. It was in a small, sunlit coffee shop in the Bronx. She was sitting across from a young woman named Elena, a 22-year-old software engineer with a revolutionary idea for a community-based logistics network. Elena was brilliant, hungry, and full of nervous energy. She was the very first recipient of a Vance Brooks Foundation grant. Elena reminded Leanna of herself. All those years ago, the same fire, the same intelligence, the same feeling of being an outsider knocking on a door that refused to open. I don't know what to say. Dr. Brooks," Elena stammered, clutching the envelope that held her seed funding. "Thank you. This is everything." Leanna looked at the young woman, at the boundless potential in her eyes. The armor she had worn for decades finally, completely, dissolved. The pain was still a part of her story, a scar she would always carry, but it no longer defined her. She had faced the ghosts of her past and had chosen not to create new ones. She reached across the table and placed her hand gently over Elena's. "You don't have to thank me," Leanna said, a genuine warm smile reaching her eyes. "Just build something wonderful.